you're most welcome to part 2 of Introduction to Cells. Now in this lesson, we are basically going to look at now the type of cells, because you already know the definition of the cell, the origin of the cell, characteristics of cell, and the nature of organisms that are formed from different groups of cells. Now we are going to look at types of cells in this lesson here. Types of cells. Basically, we have too many types of cells. We have the first group of cells that we call the prokaryotic cells. Then the second group of cells or type of cell is called a eukaryotic cells. So now there are two main types of cells. Main types of cells. And the first one we said is prokaryotic cells. Then we have a eukaryotic cells. But you find that many students they believe that the two types of cells we have animal cell and plant cell. That's mostly what students write. When the question is asked, state two types of cell, they normally write animal cell and plant cell. And we're saying the animal cell and plant cell are the examples of eukaryotic cells. But concerning the type of cells, we have the prokaryotic cell and a eukaryotic cell. Now let's look at these two types of cells one after the other. Let us start with prokaryotic cells. What are these prokaryotic cells? Prokaryotic cells, these are the primitive form of cells. Why do we call them primitive? Because these are the types of cells that existed in the earliest forms of organisms. For example, bacteria, and this is the form of cell that is found, or that is in the cell of bacteria. And the cell, normally it has no membrane that surrounds the nuclear materials, like the DNA. So the DNA, or deoxyribonucleic acid, is not surrounded by the nuclear membrane. So now we're saying, since the nuclear is not surrounded by nuclear membrane, we're saying it is not having true nucleus. Then we're saying this cell here, it is the simpler form of cell because it lacks main organelles or main important structures in the cell that are sized for directions within the cell. Therefore, we can define prokaryotic cells as these are cells that lack true nucleus. Why do we say they lack true nucleus? Because the reason is because the nuclear is not surrounded by the nuclear membrane. So it means they have nuclear in which the nuclear materials are scattered within the cytoplasm of the cell. The nuclear materials are not enclosed in the nuclear membrane. So we're saying these are cells that lack true nucleus, or these are cells with the cytoplasm that are filled with cytoplasm that lack nuclear membrane. And also one of the thing that we can talk about them is we're saying they are the simpler form of the cells. Why? The reason why we're saying they are simpler form of the cell is because they lack membrane-bound organelles. They lack membrane-bound organelles like mitochondria. So, examples of organisms with this kind of cell are organisms in kingdom Monera. So when we look at kingdom Monera, here we are looking at organisms like bacteria. Bacteria is one of the organisms that have this type of cell, and we also have the blue-green algae. Blue-green algae. Green algae is also one of the examples in the kingdom Monera. We're saying they are simpler form of cells. They are simpler form of cells. Why? Because they lack membrane-bound organelles. They lack membrane-bound organelles. Membrane-bound organelles. E.g., mitochondria. So these are simpler form of organelles because they lack membrane-bound organelles like mitochondria. So this form of cell, we call it prokaryotic cell, and organisms that have this type of cell, we call them prokaryotes. So this is the first type of the cell, and we also have a eukaryotic cell. Eukaryotic cells are actually the most developed type of cells because they have almost all components of the cell. They have all components of the cell, especially they have true nucleus. It means the nucleus is surrounded by the nuclear membrane, and also they have organelles, the important organelles. So therefore we're saying these are cells with membrane-bound organelles, and they have true nucleus. So they are considered to be the most the most developed or a complete cells. So we're saying these are cells that have true nucleus, and contain membrane-bound organelles. Membrane-bound organelles. So these are the most developed forms of the cell. They have true nucleus. It means the nucleus is surrounded by the nuclear membrane, and they have the membrane-bound organelles like mitochondria, which is found in both plant and animal cell. Then we also have chloroplast, which is found in plant cell. So these are some of the examples of the membrane-bound organelles in cells. So these cells, they contain this. So the eukaryotic cells are found in organisms like plants. They have eukaryotic cells. We have animals. We have fungi. They also have a eukaryotic cell, and we have the protists. Protists are organisms in the kingdom Protostista. So these are some of the organisms that have membrane-bound organelles. Now, let us look at some of the differences between eukaryotic and prokaryotic cells. So let us have the difference here. Difference between prokaryotic and a eukaryotic eukaryotic cell. We're going to look at some of the differences between the two types of cells. We have eukaryotic and prokaryotic cells. Now we have prokaryotic cells this side, prokaryotic cells. Then we have eukaryotic cells here. What is the difference between the two types of the cells? Now the difference is we can derive them from the definitions here. We say that the prokaryotic cells, these are cells that are not having or that lack true nucleus. So it means we're saying, we can say one of the difference is the prokaryotic cells, they lack true nucleus. Meanwhile, eukaryotic cells, they have true nucleus. So meaning that the prokaryotic cells, they are not having, the nucleus is not surrounded by nuclear membrane. Meanwhile, for eukaryotic cells, the nucleus is surrounded by the nuclear membrane, which is our first difference we can talk about. Secondly, we had also realized that the prokaryotic cells, they are cells that they do not have the membrane-bound organelles like mitochondria and chloroplast. But we're saying for the eukaryotic cells, they have membrane-bound organelles. Now we're saying, we can say these ones lack membrane-bound organelles. Such as mitochondria. Meanwhile, eukaryotic cells, they have membrane-bound organelles. Membrane-bound organelles. So these are the basic differences that we can see between the prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. Now, this one will take us to the types of eukaryotic cells. Now let's look at types of eukaryotic cells. Types of eukaryotic cells. Now, eukaryotic cells are divided into two types. Eukaryotic cells are divided into two types. Two types. So, namely, we have animal cells. Then we have plant cell. So these are two types of eukaryotic cells. When you see question like state two types of cells, then you should be able to state the prokaryotic cell and a eukaryotic cell. But when they say two types of eukaryotic cells, then we can now talk about the animal cell and the plant cell. So